Hey, Joe.
Hey, Ma.
Yeah, this month we're talking about April showers bring May flowers and getting into a two-part series. In April, we're going to focus on sort of the April showers side of things and what is darkness, what is sadness, what is depression, and can we redefine it and have a different perspective about it?
Yeah, I think it's super exciting to get to talk about these things. We don't intend for the month to be doomy and gloomy at all, but we are going to talk about some of our sadder experiences and just get into kind of some tools that we've used and how that will eventually bring us to May, a garden full of flowers.
Yeah, it's good. It was a great conversation and talking about, I feel like we really got to know you through the things that you shared, pretty vulnerable stuff. And then, I got to share. And so we'll break it up into a few different episodes. But we're excited just for you, the listener, to be able to drop in and know that, hey, if you're in a dark time, if you're going through some stuff, you're not alone. And hopefully through Joe and I sharing in a pretty vulnerable way some of the darker things that we've been through and really getting into the details of what we experienced during those times, that you'll find a place where, you're not alone, that people can relate to what you're going through, and that it's not all darkness, that there will come a time where there's light. And we'll get to sort of the tools, some of the more specific tools that we learned in May. We're going to talk about some quantum mechanics, and we're going to talk about how science is showing us that we are co-creators and we can work our way to creating the life that we dream of, and how we can do that. We're going to get into that in May. But in April, we're just going to frame the conversation as far as what did we go through? How did it feel? How can we make it so that this time of, quote, darkness is not just bad. It's not just end all, be all, it's not the end of our story. Mm-hmm. And how can we turn it around to be something beautiful? So join us for the conversation each week. We're going to share some deep stuff each time, and we hope and pray that you will be able to drop in and feel loved and feel connected and feel like you have a place where, you can be real and you can find home with us.
Let's get into it. I'm curious if you're ready to share. I know you're kind of alluding to a time where you've experienced some of the things that we're talking about, but if you're open and ready, I'm just curious what darkness you'd be willing to talk about.
I went through a lot of the typical stuff as a teenager that a lot of teenagers go through, the whole teen angst phases. But the thing that keeps coming to mind is maybe because it sort of echoes your story. When I left my ex-husband, I moved into an apartment by myself. And so this was the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know, I kind of knew that we were done. I had known for several years that, once the kids had graduated high school, that he and I were in real trouble. Mm. And we weren't really even friends anymore. We had nothing in common. We didn't like to do the same things. Our beliefs were growing further and further apart on a spiritual level. And there was this time that, it all hit the fan, and I wasn't expecting it. None of this was planned, contrary to popular story. Nothing was planned. I had no idea what was going to happen. I was terrified because we had been married almost 20 years at this point. I only worked part-time. So I couldn't support myself financially, and I knew he wasn't going to support me financially out on my own. So, a lot of background details happened, and I found myself in an apartment very suddenly, and it was that moment where I went from being a wife and a mother and a church member to being absolutely nothing.
That's really lonely.
I felt like I was nothing. And I had made some pretty poor choices, and I told my kids about them, and it caused a huge rift, right? With a T. And I told them because I wanted them to hear it from me. I didn't want them to get some secondhand full of mistruths, because that was happening a lot at that time. A lot of things were being said. Could you hand me a tissue?
Absolutely.
A lot of things were being said that weren't true at the time. And so I really wanted something to come from me to my kids, because my kids were my whole life. I homeschooled them, and up until high school, and then in high school, I taught at their school, so I was all about my kids, and 'cause they were the thing that gave me life. And when I told them this news, and they made the choices that they made, and they had to process in the way that they needed to process, and I respect that and wanted to respect that. And for people who don't know, they were my younger son was a senior in high school at that time, and my older son had graduated a year or two prior. So they were, 18, 19, 20, that age range when all this is happening. So being ripped apart from my kids because of this information, and being alone in this new apartment. And mind you, I'd never been alone. Like, I went from living in my mom's house to having roommates to being married. Had never, ever lived by myself. So at 40 something years old, I was by myself, and everything that I had identity in was gone. I wasn't a wife anymore. I didn't go to church because, he still went to that church, and he was telling people all kinds of things. And, I'm hearing secondhand all these different things that are being said. And, I wasn't in a place to be able to have those conversations and to be able to argue what was really happening. And I just couldn't process so many things. I was terrified. I didn't, so I didn't go to church, and and then I was angry, and being, separated from my kids like that, I was so angry, and I was so mad at God, because I was like, you told me that, or somebody told me, I was like, I thought that if I just did XYZ according to your rules, according to your, laws. I wasn't really a law follower. I wasn't like that, but it was just kind of like, it was sort of the expectation that if I behaved this way, that you would do that, if I did certain things right, you would bless me and, keep my family together, and my kids would be Christians. And like, there was like formula, right? Like,
oh yeah,
if I'm just this kind of Christian wife, then I'll have a happy marriage and my kids will become Christians and we'll all be happy. And the formula broke down somewhere. I don't know where still.
Yeah.
So I was alone in my apartment, and I remember one night I just couldn't take it anymore. I just fell to my knees in a pile of goo similar to now. And I just remember all I could say was like, where are you? What? How did this happen? I remember kind of thinking, that scripture that there was a lame man in the street as Jesus was passing by, and he would just call out, "Son of David, have mercy on me." That was one of those times for me. There was one other several years prior, but this was another, and it was just like, that was all I could say. Like, there was something in me that God or Jesus or something, like, it had to be real.
Yeah.
But I just couldn't grasp it. And because of some of these choices I made during this time, I definitely wasn't worthy of it, and some of my ex's stories about me, had some truth to them. So it's almost like if there's a little bit of truth, or they must be totally true somehow or something. Like, now I look back and think that's ridiculous, but in the moment, at the time, it was really, I felt responsible because I was the one that left, and I was the one, I did turn to drinking and going out and partying. Like, I was so angry. And I had no anchor anymore. I didn't have my kids to be a good example for. I didn't have them to, look after, or to take care of, or to answer to in some weird way. As a mom, I feel like maybe that's something we think or feel on some level, is like, I don't like literally answer to my kids, but when they're such a huge part of my existence, I felt like in some way I'm responsible to be responsible, for them to look at. And, I always wanted my kids to be proud of me as their mom. And that time of my life, that 6 months, I wasn't proud of me, and I knew they wouldn't be proud of me, and they weren't proud of me. The stuff that I told them and the way that we were ripped apart, it affirmed that, they weren't proud of me. And, I did things that aren't, praiseworthy. So, of course, there's a level of that I understand. But, so yeah, I think that's one of the darkest time periods of my life. Just feeling completely void.
Where do you feel like, because I mean, I can imagine that the days would kind of all meld together perhaps, or just be like, how do you get through a day? What did you do?
I think I was the same as you. I just, it was very robotic, and it was very, I had to feed myself. I had to eat. At that point, it was the same thing. Like, I got to pay the bills. I have to, I have no financial support here. And, I only work part-time, so I can't, there's no way I can miss it any time. And so I had to get up and I had to go, and I was a teacher. So in my role, I had to be animated and engaging, and I'm sure I wasn't all the time. And there were some days I was just barely holding it together in the classroom. But my students kept me alive during that time.
Wow.
And just having to get up, and I had amazing students, and they were treasures to me. And I think, had I been in any other job, because I was able to somehow, in the midst of all that, maintain an understanding that they, on some level, relied on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as a mom, my mother's heart probably really needed that.
Yeah.
And if I'd been in just some regular office job, where it was just like whatever, I don't know that I would have had the same outcome. But, being a teacher and being in a role that required me to step out of my own life and step into a classroom to give to someone else, for me, I think I've said to some of those people who were students at the time, I think I said, they were the reason I got out of bed some days,
Wow.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like the light came through? Like, because you were in this void, where did the light poke through?
It really was a very slow, very long process. I had already been accepted to grad school, and so it was almost like weirdly perfect timing, because when I got the apartment, I had exactly 6 months before I was leaving to go to grad school in a whole different state. And so I signed a 6-month lease. And I think my story is similar to yours again, in that I met James I first met him in February, but we really didn't become friends, I think, until March or April or something like that. And I saw characteristics of Jesus in him. Like, he didn't judge me. He didn't expect anything from me. He didn't, where most men wanted something from me, and, it wasn't my heart. I'll tell you that. He was just, he kept space, and he held that space, if that makes sense. And he knew I was going through stuff, and he was like, hey, if you ever need to talk about anything, he just was he never made a move on me. He never tried to flirt with me, nothing. He was just there and offered an ear, and stepped in, and he was a servant. He came over and helped me, cut vegetables. I was catering a thing, and I had to create a massive amount of salad.
That's where the vegetable story
he
comes
came
from.
over and cut vegetables with me for hours. And we just became friends. And he became someone that reflected what I thought Jesus always should be. Which was just, down to earth and didn't need anything from me, didn't want anything from me, thought I was just awesome. He was the first person I really felt like during that time, thought I was really like genuinely great, and it felt good to feel that because I felt like such a piece of garbage, so I think it helped to have someone kind of speaking those little bits of life into me and like just being present, just being present. There was without expectation. And that's kind of what I thought. And he served people, like the way he took care of his family and, people in his life and his loyalty at his job. Like he had all these characteristics that I just felt like were more godlike to me than things I had seen in religion for my entire life.
More godlike than God. Than what we knew.
Well, than religion, Yeah. Like the God I knew. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think that just kind of was a little like pinhole, in this ginormous blanket of, dark time, dark moment, sadness, alone, all the things, losing my identity. And then it just slowly grew into more and more light as I went to school. And going to school was massive for me because I had been taught in religion not to question, and had been taught that my questioning was a lack of faith. It was a lack of trust in my leadership. It was unspiritual. I was supposed to just take everything that was given to me as gospel truth, And going to school and the type of school I went to was all about questions, like you read original source text and you question in a curiosity way, not in a demeaning way, like there's two types of questions, right? The question that is like judgmental, or a question that's genuine curiosity. And so my school was all about questioning the author, getting to know their thoughts, getting to know their mind, getting to know their, their intention. What are they really getting at here? How can we know? Like, and so being able to go back to texts that were, thousands of years old and really ask those questions and try to understand, took me out of the realm of this is your Western Christian box that you have to live in, and your leadership has created the scaffolding of belief for you, and anything outside of that is a turning away from God.
Which would be spiritual darkness in our church's viewpoint. Yeah. Hey, Mom. I'm having so much fun doing this podcast with you. Thank you so much for being open to the idea of a podcast. It's a project that is centered around vulnerable conversations and showing up for other people.
Yeah, it's a joy, and I'm so glad we live in a time where we can create content like this and hopefully bless someone who's looking to engage with other people on topics that really mean something to our human experience.
Absolutely. I know we invest a lot of time and money into creating the show, and we want our viewers to know that we are listener supported. So if this episode has been helpful or entertaining in some way, would you consider buying the show a coffee?
Yeah, it's a fun way to support the project and Help us know that it blessed you. If buying a coffee, though, isn't something you can do right now, we'd love it if you would rate and share the show episodes on your own social media and help us reach more people.
Yes, we'd really appreciate all the prayers, good vibes, whether you buy us a coffee or share the content. We just want you to know we value you and your presence, and we can't wait to see where this project goes.
All right, check the show notes for links on how to buy us a coffee, but for now, let's get back to the conversation. So, being able to step out of that and go to a place where, like, you weren't on track if you weren't questioning.
Wow.
And it became this moment in this time of my life where I started to question everything and just really question, my beliefs and my relationships with people and what do I think about the world. And I mean, it was really the opening up of my life for me. And it was a pretty slow process. And the first program that I did with them was a liberal arts program, which focused on the Western, like Greeks and American history and, like the Western world and the development of the Western world. And the second program I did with them was Eastern. So like pre-Jesus, like way old stuff. And everything that I used to be, told that was satanic and, Satan worship and all the things. And I was shocked to find God there, the God that I was so familiar with in the Bible, that I found the same characteristics in so many of those texts. It just predated Jesus, so they didn't have the word Jesus for it.
Wow.
And so to see the nature and character of the Christ that I had been so, on some level, familiar with, but to see it in almost a different, like it was the same but different. It's hard to explain, like, we've spent a lot of time talking about how, the religion we grew up with, we've been like leaving because or the definition of God we've grown up with, we've been turning away from. And so it's weird to say I saw God in those texts because it's not the God that I saw in my Western religious upbringing. It's the God that I had some kind of sense of.
Wow.
That was true. That was capital T true. And like in all people, in all time.
That gives me chills. So good.
Not just one tribe of the Old Testament that was called God's people. You know what I mean? Like sorry guys, but he's everywhere.
Yes.
He's in all people, in all time. And, once we can open our eyes to that, it changes everything. And so I feel like even now, my light is exponentially growing, still growing. Because I did a lot of healing work on like my marriage trauma and my daddy issues and, like experiential life trauma. I didn't do a whole lot of healing in the spiritual realm until after I kind of went through that Eastern Classics program and just kind of took in on a head knowledge place. And I feel like now in the last year, I've been able to kind of move it down into a heart space where I'm really getting to like open up to and experience God in a heart way. Taking a lot of that new knowledge I was getting from reading Eastern stuff and like finding the overlap. Like some of the Western stuff hits on it, and then you see it affirmed in Eastern stuff that you read and you're like, oh, okay. So the overlap must be the capital T truth, like those must be the places where everyone who is supposedly a different religion says the same thing. That must be the true nature of God, because that's a universal truth that everybody recognizes. And so those are the places that I I on a head level have been studying for, whatever, how many years. And then in the past year, it's really been like, okay, and now let's experience that. Let's explore that little thing and like open ourselves up to that on an emotional level, and let it now move from just an intellectual space to the true God, the true source of all life, is alive and active and truly guiding in a real-time way, and like opening myself up slowly to experiencing that and learning to trust that, because my religious past told me that was not a thing.
Don't trust yourself, trust God.
You cannot trust yourself. And it was all about this separation between God. I was not God. God was not me. Like, I only had access to God because Jesus, did all these things. And so I'm still a piece of garbage and still not worthy of God, but thank goodness Jesus did the things. And so there was always just this weird, like, access problem, And so I would pray for things and sometimes would see answers to those prayers. Like, God would do the things, like the good little genie in the bottle. But when the big things mattered, when my marriage was on the line, when my relationship with my kids was destroyed, God was no longer the genie in the bottle, and it pissed me off.
Yeah.
And it wrecked my world. It wrecked my belief system and brought me down to a pile of rubble. And in the pile of rubble, I was in the darkness. I was in this moment of absolute uncertainty and dismay and disillusioned and disoriented, and everything had fallen apart. Nothing to hold on to. And it was scary. But then, like, the best part is I would not be who I am right now without that.
Yeah.
And so I don't think God caused it. I don't even think it was one of these things where God was like, oh, I'm going to allow this thing to happen.
It's not like a flip it, oh, I'll allow that, where it's
hard because he can allow or not. Like, to me, it's more about creation. Like, we're creating the life, and this is probably more of the conversation for May. So I'll just barely touch on it, but I don't see God anymore as this like cosmic puppeteer who is in control of everything and knows every outcome, and so sits back and says, I got this. Like, I don't see God that way. I see God as, like you were saying in your prayer before we started, you feel big and small. That's how I see God. I see God as big and small, because he makes himself small enough to come sit with me in my tiny corner of the universe, in my pain that feels vast and feels enormous and feels all-consuming. But when I step back or put a little bit of distance, I can see that in the span of the cosmos and the universe and all that is, it's a tiny little seed. It's a tiny little moment, but God's in it. And so in one sense, God is small because he's with me in that tiny little moment, and he's just sitting with me. He's just being that presence that James was a reflection of. I had this amazing experience about a month or two ago where I felt like God stepped in and redeemed every bad choice I made, every bad feeling I felt, everything that I told myself was a shameful thing that I had done, God redeemed it. Like he was like, yeah, you remember that thing? Yeah, that was me. Or I was there. I was, remember how you felt desired by that person who wasn't your husband? That was me. I just saw your eyes, because I'm telling you, every Christian will think and say the same thing that your eyes just said very loud and clear. Like, no.
No, the funny.
That is not how God operates. But here's the thing. God desires us so completely. And he's not bound by anything. He's not bound by my sin. He's not bound by my poor choices. He's not bound by religion. He's not bound by rules and regulations.
He rescued you in that moment.
If there's a moment and a way for him to express to a human person that has been created and redeemed before all of time, if there's a moment he can step in and make you feel loved and desired, he will. And this is not oh gosh, I just see my Christian friends
don't look at my
canceling
eyeballs.
me.
I'm sorry, they react so fast.
I feel them canceling me. This is not a license to go out and cheat on a husband or a wife or, make awful decisions. It's not what that is. Okay, we're standing with Paul in Romans in grace. It does not mean that you have license to go and just sin, right? It just means that God's bigger than the box you want to put him in.
Yeah.
And he does more things than the religious world wants to see that he does. He can step into, like I was saying, I think it was in the prayer as well, like, if I make my bed in the depths of hell,
God is there.
You are there.
Yeah.
God is with us in the depths of hell, still communicating love and desire to just be with us. He's not communicating love and desire for us to be a better version of ourselves. He's not stepping in and saying, would you get your shit together?
Oh my gosh.
That's not it. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Becoming Home podcast. Hey, Joe, where can folks connect with you?
Y'all can reach me at Instagram. My handle is committing_2_change. How about you, Mom?
Yeah, you guys can find me at fullyabundantlife.com. And if you happen to be listening to the audio version of the podcast and you're looking for the video version, head on over to my YouTube channel, Fully Abundant Life. You'll find the podcast there under a playlist titled The Becoming Home Podcast. We appreciate your time so much. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we'll see you next time.